Well, to that end, he called the governor a crook and said that Larry Schwartz ought to be fired if, in fact, he's acting on behalf of the governor. And if he wasn't, why does he still have a job? Is there any exposure, as much as you can see, Jimmy, in terms of, forget about criminally here or otherwise for the governor, we'll get politically, but is there any chance that somebody from his administration will be shown the door? The governor will have to make a formal apology out of this. Will there be investigations in any way, shape, or form about what happened to the Moreland Commission?
It's unclear whether we're going to see aides forced from office or if we're going to see some sort of public apology. I think it's a little bit too early to say. What is interesting and is telling is that we haven't heard much from the elected class here in Albany. Even Republican state legislators in the Assembly and Senate have been largely quiet about this. And I think if this scandal is going to have legs, and if there is going to be that level of political pressure that will perhaps force action, we're going to see more involvement. We're going to see more of a unified front.
Do you think Bahar knew back in April? I mean, it surprised me a little bit that he would take on Cuomo when the commission died, obviously, in that late-hour budget deal, that he said the U.S. Attorney's Office was going to get involved. Do you think he knew back in April about some of the back chatter as to, what was really going on with the commission and some of, the conversations supposedly between Schwartz and the commissioners to make certain investigations go away?
Yes, I absolutely do. A lot of this stuff was reported in September and October of last year by the New York Daily News. So while there was more detail in the recent report in the New York Times, the crux of what was reported, the fact that there was this interference, was already out there and was already known.
A frequent guest to the program, Phil Reisman, he wrote a good piece, I thought, today on Low HUD, and going into a little bit of Larry Schwartz because of his background in Westchester County, but more than that, about what this really says as to a state of affairs in Albany. And you're up there, Jimmy, so I'm curious if you agreed with it to a certain degree. He said, corruption in New York is so dizzying in its awful scope that it's hard to get your arms around it. But there's something especially creepy about the Moreland scandal, which isn't about stealing money. That would be easier to grasp. These allegations come down to the theft of the public soul and the death of idealism. It's a tragedy, and I guarantee you, because I've always been surprised by this, I don't know if you are, Jimmy, when you ask the average New Yorker how many elected officials up in Albany are on the take or are crooked or whatever else, the majority, and I think a significant plurality, say, oh, almost all of them. Now, you and I both know that's not the case, but because of the drip, drip, drip of scandal after scandal that goes on, whether it's the Assembly, the State Senate, the City Council, wherever it is, there has been certainly a hit in the integrity of the body politic that the public just doesn't trust them anymore.
The public doesn't trust them, and they also, I don't think, care. I think that perhaps what Phil was alluding to is the fact that people expect legislators, they expect these little beneficences. You could call it whatever you want. Honest graft is the term used by, George Washington Plunkett. That people in New York have just come to accept it.
And that was going to be my final question, where at the end of the day, do you think voters will care? I mean, they've been somewhat, as you say, anesthetized to this after a while. But obviously, Rob Astorino is going to try and make this a major issue between now and November. Do you think it resonates?
I think it's going to be tough. Astorino has been good, and he is gifted at delivering a concise message. He has a knack for it as both a political figure and as a former broadcaster. And his point is that Cuomo corrupted his own anti-corruption commission. Those are his words exactly. I don't know how much that's going to resonate, because on the other side, Andrew Cuomo can look voters in the eye and say, your taxes are lower than they were 4 years ago. He can look at them and say, I capped property taxes. For years they talked about it, and I capped property taxes. He can look at people who are concerned about gun violence and talk about the gun control law that he passed. He can look at gay and lesbian New Yorkers and say, I brought gay marriage to New York. These are some pretty tangible things I think are going to resonate perhaps more with voters than a corruption issue that's a bit more ethereal.
We'll see where this all plays out, but Jimmy, I certainly appreciate a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure, Richard. Thanks for having me.
All right, let me bring in a guy who's followed more than a few governors in his time and seen more than a few scandals. I'm not saying it reached this level. Dominic Carter, of course. We're going to get into your conversation on the Garner case coming up in a little bit later in the show.
Surely.
But this thing playing out, a couple things now make a little sense. First off, I never knew why Bahar got involved back in the spring, because I'm like, you don't make enemies with this governor, and certainly Bahara's got political ambitions. Unless there's there, it certainly looks like there's something. Maybe it's not criminal, but it don't look right when the governor interferes with his own commission that was supposed to break down corruption. Just for everybody out there, Dom, the perception, whether it's real or not, the perception is that he had the governor, this commission, and if you as a lawmaker didn't fly right by him, he had a perfect opportunity to go investigate you here. So, you kind of got the guy by the screws there a little bit if he or she didn't play right. And you know what? Critics who say that it's not entirely unfair right now.
And the other allegation, Richard, is if you happen to be a big-time donor to the Cuomo campaign and the commission wanted to subpoena you, all of a sudden those subpoenas had to go through the chair who was adamantly against it and through the governor's office. And in many cases, the subpoenas would disappear. And these donors would allegedly, give the information that the commission wanted on its own. This is good news for Governor Cuomo in terms of for this to come in the middle of the summer.
However, though, Don.
And it's bad news.
Yeah.
It's a good news, bad news. Let me just tell you I'll start with the good news for him first. The good news is no matter how much people like us pay attention to it,
a lot of people
voters don't care. Voters don't care. We can talk about it till we're blue in the face. Voters are not noticing this in the middle of the summer. That's the good news. So the timing is good for him. The bad news is Astorino has plenty of time to make us think about it, to make people focus on this.
And there's this part of the story, whether it's true or not, it's going to, what else got buried, right? This idea that, hey, wait a second here, there could be a whole lot of lawmakers that could be in trouble here. And magically, that might have been one of the reasons why the budget went through the way it did.
Of course, that's why the budget went through.
That there was some horse race.
There's no doubt about that.
Except here's my problem, Don.
That.
If all of a sudden, Astorino can make a compelling argument and say, hold on, some crook here gets to have his troubles go away if he goes for the governor, and that kind of a trade worked. And again, I'm not alleging that's what happened, but if the perception keeps going out there that this governor is just as bad as a corrupt system that is, as he said, it's become a swamp in Albany, now he's got a narrative, Rob Astorino. We're going to be...
But, he can have all the narratives he wants in the world. He doesn't have enough money to get his message out.
He's going to get free media with this thing. You can be sure of that.
We'll see.
All right. Still to come on RFL. We are going to have an exclusive interview. In fact, Dominic's interview earlier today with both the mother and daughter of Eric Garner one day after he was laid to rest. This, as a second chokehold incident involving the NYPD, has now come to light. And also coming up, what are the top races shaping up to look like in November? I'm not talking about the governor's race here, still about almost a 40-point spread between he and Mr. Astorino, but I'm saying a whole lot of congressional races in our neck of the woods. We'll be joined by a Politico's campaign elections editor to talk about what should be probably on everybody's radar here in just a few months. Stay with us.